Ryan. Thanks so much for joining CEOwise.
Thanks, Dan.
Now, you're the CEO and founder of CallCabinet, where you develop software for call recording and agent evaluation. Tell me a bit about CallCabinet.
Dan, CallCabinet develops software to record telephone calls, and then once those calls have been recorded, to perform agent evaluation and analytics on the data that's been collected. Call recording is really where you would call into a business, and the telephone system would say this call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. That's what we do.
How long did it take for your first version of your software to get off the ground, and did that have just basic functionality?
So the first product that we developed probably took about a year to year and a half to get version 1 off the ground, which was really very much just call recording. It didn't have a lot of the analytics features, a lot of the reporting, a lot of the security functionality in place that we have today.
Yeah. Well, I think in this short space of time of 3.5 years or so, I mean, your developers have grown from say 1 to 11 or so. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's been a really interesting ride. You know, we probably, when we started this exercise or launched the product, probably recording somewhere like 5,000 telephone calls a month in our Atmos platform. You know, that's now in the tens of millions, and our growth rate is just, you know, continuing on a month-to-month, you know, basis. So it's really been interesting, and that growth has allowed us to add additional development resources. So right now we employ about 10 full-time developers globally that are working on the system, you know, all the time, which is, I guess, what allows us to, you know, update the system as often as we do.
You're based in Boca Raton in Florida. That's a totally different market. How do the two markets compare, the US and South Africa?
Okay, so I think before I can answer that, I need to explain that there are a number of different reasons that people record their telephone calls. So the first one is compliance. So government says, hey, in this industry, you need to record your calls. The second one is quality assurance. So a company wants to make sure that their employees are giving the correct information to their customers, and that ultimately customers are happy, because that's what drives their revenue.
Sure.
The third one is security. So imagine a stockbroker needing to record the details of a transaction to make sure that, you know, what the customer said, hey, buy me, you know, 10 stock in Microsoft, that didn't go and, you know, buy 100. And those are the main three reasons. And then obviously employee training is another you know, important factor. So coming back around to your question, in South Africa, compliance is by far the biggest driving factor behind recording. Most industries record because they have to, and that's getting, you know, with some of the new acts and legislation that's coming in, that's even, you know, getting you know, more important. Whereas in the US, compliance is probably the last one on that list.
Wow.
Most companies in the US are recording from a quality perspective, making sure that their employees, like we said, are giving the correct message and making sure that customers are happy. Another big difference with working in the US is face-to-face meetings very, very rarely happen. In South Africa, we're used to getting in our car and going and seeing a customer, and you can forget about ever selling anyone anything without seeing them.
Sure.
In the US, it never happens. I can count on one finger the number of times I've been in front of an actual customer, other than at a trade show, but actually going and visiting with the customer. Typically, American companies don't have the time, don't want you to come to the office. A lot of them work remotely, and the scale of the country is massive. You've got to remember that just the state that we're in, which is Florida, has a bigger GDP than South Africa. So when you talk about, there's 50 of those around the country, and chances are that if you split your customers across those, you know, those states, 1 out of every 50 customers you deal with is likely to be in your state, and your state is the size of South Africa. So there's just no way to get in a car and drive to see someone.
You're talking about trade shows. You travel to a lot of trade shows around the world. Now, how do you think that can benefit a business, I guess, on brand awareness point of view?
So trade shows are interesting. We never know if they work or don't. You know, there's the famous saying that 50% of advertising works. We just don't know which 50%. It's all, for us, it's about two things: brand awareness and interacting with customers that we may not normally get to see. You know, it's really important to understand who the target market of that trade show is. So if I could give anyone advice that's thinking about it, trade shows are ridiculously expensive. You know, a reasonable trade show is going to cost you by the time you're done anywhere from $20,000 up per trade show. You need to make sure that the people that are there are the people that you want to be getting your message to.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions.
You've had many successful businesses in the past, one of which was PC Mall, which is a tech e-commerce website. Now, with that, you were an early adopter of Google AdWords, which was 10 or 15 years ago. How do you think online marketing has changed in that time?
So I think things have changed dramatically. I think AdWords at that stage was probably 90% of our marketing budget, our marketing spend. We were just coming out of that idea of paying for impressions, where people would say, give us 10,000 and we'll show your ad 1 million times to a whole bunch of people who don't really care about what you're selling. And obviously AdWords allowed us to focus, but as time's gone on, AdWords has become not irrelevant, absolutely not, but certainly just one of the tools that we have. So we spend, from a marketing perspective, we spend a lot on trade shows like you mentioned, AdWords, SEO to drive generic traffic, but all of that is irrelevant if you don't have the content. So blogs, content, white papers, all of that is critical in that marketing message.
So many people are looking for that elusive annuity income, and you moved away at one point from a traditional business model to a more subscription-based business model. Tell me a bit about that.
So we took the decision about 3.5 years ago that the future was in a subscription, or at least our future was in a subscription-based model. The main driving factor behind that was we saw that a couple of things were happening. Number one, phone systems were moving into the cloud. So a lot of businesses no longer had a phone system or a telephone box in their office. But more importantly, with the growing government legislation, especially in South Africa, requiring companies to record, having them pay hundreds of thousands for phone system recordings just doesn't make sense. Businesses couldn't afford it. So we went out to try and reduce the cost of call recording. I mean, that was the main driving factor. And we, most customers would, let's say your business was going to put in a call recording system, that could cost you anywhere from 50,000 up. Where's that money coming from? And what we did is we reduced the cost of that down to $49, or in South Africa 395 rand a month as an entry point. So taking that big check that you would have to write as a capital expense and turning it into an operating expense that covered all of the things that you would need to pay for the system.
And it makes sense as a business to do that anyway. Running a tech company must come with its own challenges. What has been the most challenging for you to get where you are today?
I think, tech businesses normally start out in one of two tracks. Either you go to a venture capital person and they throw money at you and you don't care about money, or you decide to do it on your own, and that is the challenge, because you need resources. It's very difficult to do things when you don't have the money to do it, or when you have limited money. And our your mindset's got to change. It's hard to spend money when you don't have it, but sometimes you have to. The level or the quality of employees that you employ is critical. When you start out, you almost want to get the cheapest guy, not really thinking that that's actually going to end up costing you a lot more money in the long run. Because half of your valuable time as the person who started the business is now spent on training or picking up the pieces of what's not working. And that for us was, you need people you can trust. That was the biggest thing, for us in growing, is just finding those right people. Because there's nothing worse in feeling that you have to check up on your employees.
Agreed.
Because if that happens, you've lost the battle before you start.
Okay.